What's up, guys? Welcome back. Card Boss here with another episode on the podcast. Today we're going to talk about card grading and why I think that in 2025 card grading is no longer a profitable venture, in my opinion. So before we talk about my thoughts on card grading, I'm just going to take you guys a bit of a history lesson. Okay, so I think by now you guys should be know a bit about what card grading is, what companies are there out there. There is the big boys like PSA, SGC, CGC, and Beckett to some extent. Okay, and these guys like PSA and Beckett has been around for the longest time. Now, to be honest, I myself only got into grading, or basically familiar with grading, around 2016, 2017, and that was when I purchased my first graded card, which was a Magic the Gathering card. And that's when I kind of appreciate the value of the encapsulation as well as the grade itself to determine authenticity as well as the condition. So prior to that, I had no clue about what grading was or what kind of value it actually brought to the collectible, in this case the cards itself. And I think a lot of people back then didn't realize this as well. Perhaps it looked good, perhaps it was meant for storage, so they had all the reasons why they did grading back then. And back in the days as well, grading was cheap, right? $10 I believe, or maybe cheaper, I can't remember. But by the time I started grading my own cards, it was actually during the start of the pandemic, late 2019, early 2020. That's when the whole world came to a standstill and everybody was stuck at home, and we all had to work on our cards and decide to send a bunch of stuff to PSA and Becker and so on and so forth. And I think that those who were around during that time, probably be familiar with what happened during that time. It was 5 years already. Time really passed really fast, right? So lots of people were sending cards to PSA, lots of people sending cards to Beckett, and there was huge bottleneck, right? Massive delays to the point that PSA themselves had to shut down. They tried to increase the price. I remember at one point was sending a card to send for grade was like $75 for regular. It was insane, right? Compared to when previously I started grading, it was like 15 or was it 11, right? And then slowly it was 15, 19, 25, and then like 75 at some point. It was nuts. And okay, so fast forward a couple of years later, okay. Maybe take a step back first. Why grading was such a big thing, okay? There was a kind of simple math that you could work out. If you bought a raw card and you send it for grading, let's say for example you pay $100 for the raw card and you spend maybe $20 on grading or $30 on grading, okay? If you got a PSA 10, it is known to you're able to at least 3x your money. So which means that you could sell it for $300 back then. So if you invest $100 plus 30, you get 300. That's a nice $170 profit. Okay, maybe 2.5 times, so to speak. And if you got a PSA 9, most of the time you would definitely still make back your grading fee and maybe with just a little bit of profit. And if you got a PSA 8, likely it's the same cost of the raw, and all you have lost was just the cost of grading. Okay, most of the time that was the situation back in 2019, 2020. And I had opportunity to be very active during that time to send lots and lots of cards for grading. Zion Williamson prisms, you guys are familiar as well. Now I bought them, when they first released for $40 and sent for grading. At some point it was worth almost $1,000. This was base prisms. Okay, it was insane, nuts back then. Of course, my Zions came back pretty late because of all the shutdowns and the delays, and I sold them for, I believe, maybe $400 or $500, which is still really good money. Today it's I don't know what, $30 perhaps. So that was really a crazy time, to be involved in grading. You could literally grade anything. So as long as you get back a PSA 10, it's gonna worth some money. Okay. Now, unfortunately, when you fast forward a couple of years, even towards the end of 2022, 2023 and 2024 as well, right? The amount of premium or amount of multiplier on these grading multiples, we will call it, right, are not as great as where it was during the pandemic. Of course, there are certain exceptions, right? PSA 10 will always be PSA 10, and they will always command a premium over, you know, the raw cards, for example. But does it command 2x or 3x? It depends as well. And especially when you talk about modern cards, right? When you send a card for grading, and these days, you know, with value bulk with PSA costs $19, and then with the price increase recently, it's $20. It's actually, if you don't get a PSA 10, it's almost considered loss making, because PSA 9 sometimes, occasionally, even sells for lesser than the price of the raw. You know, you're kind of like better off if you actually get a PSA 9 to re-crack the card out of the slab and sell it as a raw, knowing that you won't get a PSA 10 unless you were super confident that it's going to get a PSA 10. Therefore, you do a resubmit. But again, all these things takes time, takes money, so it's tough, okay? And that's why I actually move into the older cards, the 90s, okay? But you probably ask the question, 90s cards are almost impossible to gem. That's true. Even PSA 9 is a real challenge as well, right? So, but that's when, you know, PSA 8s and PSA 7s do carry some value even after you impute the grading fees. You'll be surprised. Recently, I sold a 1996 EX, a cut above, Kevin Garnett, which I graded myself. I bought it for about $290. It looked pretty clean, you know, pretty confident. But with these kind of die cut kind of cards, it's, you know, anything goes, right? And true enough, it came back a PSA 8. So I spent about 20 plus on grading fees. So my total cost is about like $310, $313, and I sold it for $340 net after fees, and still make about like $20 odd on a PSA 8. Okay, so had it been a PSA 9, you know, if it got a PSA 10, that would be a different story. But, you know, got a PSA 9, it would have been like a $500 or $600 card. You know, PSA 8, you know, just a $340, cost of $313, and, you know, still make about $20 of profit. So that's where I keep reiterating, you know, my earlier video that I mentioned, is all comes down to the purchase price of the card. You could do anything, you know, you could try to grade a card, you could try and spend a lot of time to examine what kind of grade you get, but it all comes down to the original cost base of the card, because as far as the selling price is concerned, you know, it's up to the market to determine what kind of price they want to pay, you know, especially for lower grade stuff, you know, PSA 8s. There could be tons and abundance around, so naturally you'll be very conservative with the selling price. So, but what you can control is the cost price that you pay for it. So in my case with the Kevin Garnett, I bought it at a decent price. I kind of expected, you know, at very least, if it got a PSA 8, okay, I would still net about $20 for my time, which was still alright. Now, if we got a PSA 7, what will happen? Of course, likely it will take a small loss, and it's all about game of numbers. You know, you don't send in just one card, you do a bulk value submission, 20 cards, and then hopefully, you know, 12 or 13 cards will do well. Those days when you want to send cards to PSA, talk about gem rates, right? What kind of percentage of 10s you get, and people are saying that, oh, I got 70% gems, 90% gems. You know, some people, you know, even for myself, when I was doing it, I was like 40% gem. I was like, thinking, what am I doing wrong? 40% gem rate PSA 10s. Everybody's doing like 70, 80. You know, maybe I might not looking through the card more thoroughly. But these days, right, you know, getting a PSA submission, 20 cards, if you happen to get even one PSA 10, for me, when I do 90s cards, right, it's amazing. So it's amazing. So I target to get 9s. Obviously, there is premiums there as well, and 8s are all right. Okay, but all these, you know, like the Kevin Garnett example that I gave earlier, you know, you make $20 margin on a $300 card. You know, decent. It's about like maybe what I always talk about, 7-8% net margin. You know, keep on rinse and repeat, and you could still make a decent bankroll through this, but it's slow, right? So for my case, if you're running a full-time business, you got to do a lot of these, you know, to make money. I'm not saying it's difficult. It's definitely possible, but as time goes by, the availability of cards on the market, raw cards on the market, that's gradable, Okay, it's getting lesser and lesser. Those days, when you guys hop on eBay, it's pretty okay with decent scans. It's easy to kind of like filter through and determine what raw cards would kind of do well and not do well. But these days, it's getting harder and harder. And most of the time, if any raw cards were to appear on eBay that's not encapsulated by Flawless, for example, that's not Panini sealed, for example, chances are it's been picked through. Okay, whether or not it's been graded, that's unsure. Okay, but chances are it's been picked through. So the best avenue to kind of like get raw cards for grading is still to card shows where you can spend the time to look at a card, hold it in your hand, look at it thoroughly with a loop, without a loop, whatever it is, to really assess the condition of a card, and that would qualify for the best grade possible. Doing it out online has its challenges, right? Most of the time, I kind of go in blind, to be honest. And that's when, if I'm buying raw cards, and for my case, right, having it shipped back to Malaysia, it's going to take time, right? When I buy a card in, let's say, in early November, I probably see the card in like somewhere mid-December by the time it reaches me. So it takes a while, and it only takes me like a minute to look through the card and to tell whether or not it's worth to send for PSA. And if it's not, I'm going to put it back for sale. And the whole process, by the time I get back my money, the raw card, it's like 2 months, okay, at minimum. So grading has been, the way the landscape of grading has been in the past 1.5 years has been going towards this direction. And I foresee it not changing in 2025. Now, despite PSA increasing their prices, people are still going to submit in large quantities because PSA 10s is still where the premium is, and there's still a lot of people who believe and rely on grading, to get the maximum value from the cards, and I don't blame them. It is the best way to get the value out of your raw cards, because as I mentioned, you're trying and flip a card, 5-10% margin, if you're lucky 15, but grading is where you get the multiples, but only if you hit the top grade, the PSA 10s or the BGS 9.5s, SGC 10s. But failing to do so, it's rough and it costs a lot of money. Okay, so if you're doing in huge volumes, huge quantities, like some of the guys that I know out there, they grade 200 cards at one time or 500 cards at one time. Based on the numbers, chances are you will do well, just because of sheer volume of cards. They kind of average out one another. But if you're just going to submit like 5 cards or 10 cards, and you don't get any gem back, you're going to be extremely disappointed on not just the amount of money that you probably lose, but also the amount of time has gone in for you to pick those cards and to send them for grading and just to get those kind of results. So I'm not advocating against grading. Grading is still important. Authentication and encapsulation, I think, is still a big part of this hobby. And of course, without grading, it's impossible to buy and sell graded cards online, because buying and sell raw cards is tough enough, so you need graded cards to make money. So if I'm not doing the grading, somebody else has to be doing it. If everybody stops grading, then where all these graded cards come from? Correct? So therefore, I still view grading is important, but for me, it's something that I'm going to do lesser for this year, 2025, as compared to previous years. Early on, when the pandemic, I used to have like 250 to 300 cards at PSA at any one point in time. That kind of shrunk a bit. In fact, last year, at the maximum I had at PSA was like 60 cards, 3 bulk submissions at one go, at most, maybe plus a couple of regulars. So nothing more than 70 cards at one go. This time around, maybe 20 cards every 2 months, perhaps, if I can put together, a decent set of cards that's ready for grading. But aside from that, I don't foresee that being a big part of my business, even though I do realize that there is substantial incremental value for grading. I just feel that the amount of raw cards available, to be sent for grading, that's gradable, that's not been picked through, it's getting scarcer, especially for me that requires to buy exclusively online. Right, you guys got access to card shows, or you guys do breaks, or take part in breaks, or buy off the pack pool cards straight from the breaks. Yep, maybe that will work. I think I'm not too sure what the quality of the cards are these days coming out from straight from the pack, but that will be the only avenue, safe avenue, I would say, to really send the cards for grading. Otherwise, to me, I think it's a losing proposition to try to imagine the card still get a PSA 10 if it's been sitting in the market for quite a while. Okay, so that's it on grading, and that's what I think about grading in the year 2025, at least from my perspective, from an online reseller. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop grading, and doesn't mean that you guys should stop as well, but I think that it's no longer, I feel, the best way to make the most money from this hobby. Alright, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, guys. Do like, follow my channel, and do subscribe. Please, I do appreciate it. Till next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Cowboys out.